Hey, welcome everyone to Rules Explained. I'm John Merritt,
Nah, I'm Rob, nothing.
and we're going to be talking about Starfleet battles in this episode. Classic game from what
Oh, it goes way back to the 70s, yeah. Absolutely. It
1970
was its
something.
original initiation and inception, yeah.
So we've got the Cadet Training Handbook, which when I first started looking at it, I was like, "There's no way." I started flipping through it, and then I found myself getting very distracted with anything else. I just did not want to read this. But the more I kind of looked into it and dug into it a bit, they I found this to be a very rule crunchy game,
hmm
and the way they are, the way who's they who does this game?
Well, the the game company currently in charge of this is Amarillo Design Bureau. Um, but the person who is responsible for this was a writer for a game company called Task Force Games, one of my favorite game companies out of the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And the person who wrote it was Stephen Cole. And I do remember this distinctly during his first few, um, shall we say, credits pieces, where where you put your credit, who the author was on any particular game. He always signed off by saying professional engineer, and this would go ahead and perhaps give you a little bit of insight when you're talking about rules crunchy and detail oriented and so on and so forth. This was a guy who was obviously a huge Star Trek fan and read Joseph's um, Starfleet technical manual, the one that was put out fairly early in Star Trek fandom.
Uh-huh.
And he said, "Wow, I'm going to go ahead and base a game off this since there seems to be a whole bunch of games out there. But how do you simulate? In fact, he even says this in the designer notes. How do I simulate combat in a universe in which the official source material is not only so sparse on how starship combat works, but also seemingly focuses on outliers in starship combat, very unusual situations that most starship, captains and most spaceships would not get themselves involved in.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, it was a very interesting experiment by this engineering. I think he got it, but we'll talk more about this whole idea of resource management in a little bit.
Well, that's funny because as I was flipping through this, I'm going, this reminds me of an engineering manual. It really did. It reminded me of a schematic of some project I might be implementing at work or something. It's just what it reminded me of. I was like, wow, they've got charts upon charts, and the different phases and the impulse movements and forms and more charts. In fact, it even starts off with explaining. Here it is. Here's a chart. Here's how to cross index. That's so
Yeah,
cool.
this was again coming out of an era in which there was quite a bit of emphasis on the idea of charts and combat results tables and using charts to go ahead and resolve things. Obviously, today we see more of an emphasis on streamlining play, which means you roll one die and that should
Oh
tell
yeah.
you everything you need to know about if you hit. And of course, maybe there's another die. But back in this time period, the various charts were ubiquitous. They're everywhere,
They were
and each
everywhere.
one of them was designed to go ahead and cover a different aspect of the game, and sometimes with different game mechanics within the same game. So you didn't have a lot of consistency within the charts and how they were used. Like for example, Starfleet battles in many ways.
When did a BattleTech come out?
That was, oh my gosh. I was entering boot camp just as that game was released as Battle Joys, and
That's
it
right.
was, yeah, that was the original name of the game, and they were catching on to the anime mecha craze that the American import of Macross Saga had created.
I love
As a
that
matter of
series.
fact, yeah, Robotech was great, wasn't it?
But which game do you think influenced which one? Do you think Starfleet Battles influenced the BattleTech game, or do you think
Yes,
the BattleTech game influenced this one?
no. No, Starfleet Battles was first,
Okay.
and in many ways you can see the same concept of resource management in the original Battle Droid slash Battle Tech game,
Oh
in
yes.
which you're supposed to be watching out, not necessarily, I mean, you got ammo, and you're supposed to be watching out for your armor. You're supposed to be watching out for your heat levels.
It was the heat
So there
level was
was,
the big deal.
yeah, heat levels was a big, really big thing. As a matter of fact, most of the games I remember playing of BattleTech and Battle Droids back in the day was just a question of who can get to the lake first so we can fire all of our weapons at once without worrying about overheating. You know, it was kind of funny.
So then, as it went on, we have a glossary of terms. So they introduce you small. So you start off as a nothing or a cadet, and they have different scenarios, and then you graduate and you move up the ranks. So they start you off with a very basic game, teaching you how to turn, teaching you movement. So in this first scenario, they teach you the sequence of play, the movement rules. I don't remember the movement rules. It's been a long time since I played this game. I
Well, in
really loved it. I
short,
think I still had the original box somewhere.
yeah, the if you wanted a complete history of the game, and I'm sure somebody in the audience would like this, it originally was part of Task Force Games series of mini games, if you wish. There was a big craze that came out in the 80s about mini games.
I
Metagaming
remember they
had
came in
their
like little small packages with like micro dice.
right. You had various companies. Heritage came out with their version. We have Task Force, as I just said. We have Metagaming, which eventually went out of business as Steve Jackson kind of took that over. We talked about that last time. But in short, so this was one of their initial offerings in that line of task force games, mini games, in which they were trying to go ahead and just have very small games that were easily playable within a couple of hours.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I mean, it was pretty good. But then the game became very popular, and they released it in a larger, more complete set that had many of the rules that were found in expansions. So that was the box set, and then it just exploded after that, and you had multiple different versions. And I think the latest iteration is continuing with the tradition of trying to keep the core the same, but modify some of the game mechanics to fit with modern game design theory.
So this game is still published.
Yeah,
Wow. I wonder what
yeah.
version they're on.
Well, yeah, this game, like Ogre, which we discussed a couple episodes ago, is basically one that is got a lot of staying power. There's not a lot of war games out there that have this kind of staying power because, they the whole idea about playing something on paper and using even miniatures is for war gaming is still kind of the purview of Games Workshop and their juggernaut.
Yeah, I know this game got really popular. In fact, they came out with a computer game for this
Hmm.
called Starfleet Command, and it was based on this game. That was back in 99 ish. And they had sequels. I mean, this game got really high ratings. People really liked it. So I mean, even as a computer game like Ogre, I mean, it took off. People loved it. What did we really like? I mean, I love the idea of you're in charge of a starship. You
Hmm.
have to allocate the energy where it goes. You have to put points into life support and firing system and you know, your weapons, your shields, your life support. You have to charge your weapons. You know, like you said, there's a lot of resource management. There's a strategy
Yes.
and tactics which
I
are
was
in
just
play
about to
here.
go ahead and say that exact phrase. This is one of the first resource management games that was really
Yeah.
out in the wargaming and tabletop gaming field. It really has you looking at every piece of your starship and saying, where can I put the energy? At the beginning of the game, you're pretty free to charge up anything you want, but as your ship starts taking damage, or you start draining your batteries, or whatever the case may be, you begin to realize I need to start making decisions. And
Mm-hmm.
it becomes kind of interesting. You can overcharge your photon torpedoes. You can go ahead and decide to pour in some energy to transporters if you want to try to board the other person's ship. There's so many different choices you have. And by the way, if I remember correctly, the scale of the game was all this was taking place in just a matter of seconds in every turn. So it was kind of an interesting conceit to the universe in which it was depicting.
Well, you're moving at impulse speed. Isn't like impulse speed like sub light speed,
Impulse speed is sublight speed, and if you do move at impulse speed in this game, you're moving 1 hex per turn.
which is the speed of light, right?
Just under it, yeah.
Just under it. Okay.
According to the fiction, according to the narratives, sublight impulse engines, depending on the era, can get you anywhere between about 50% and 70 or 80% of light speed. But they do not get you up to light speed because if I remember correctly, and I'm pretty sure I do, someone's going to argue with me on this, impulse engines work on basic Newtonian physics. So you can't go, and I'm sorry, and Einsteinian physics. So you can't go faster than light. So the warp in the cells and the warp power is what you need to get faster than light.
Mm-hmm. So in the rules, they start you off very small. Here's a ship. Here's how to turn. Here's how to move.
Hmm.
The impulse engines, and then as you go through the different scenarios, they tack on rules.
Yes.
So they've got the firing arcs. They have direct fire weapons. They have missile weapons, and the missile weapons even take on an icon of their own, don't they?
Hmm. Yeah, let me double back on what you were talking about as far as graduating from level to level.
Mm-hmm.
Programmed instruction books were extremely popular also during this time period.
Good point.
Games like Squad Leader, for example, which is something we should probably try to tackle at some point if we have several days worth of podcasting available. Um, but yeah, we had Squad Leader, and one of my favorites from Avalon Hill, another favorite would be Starship Troopers, the original uh, version of the licensed game. All of these were basically saying, okay, let's start simple. Here's your basic ways of moving and firing, and then we'll add complexity in each scenario, so that way you can go ahead and just get gradually introduced to the game. And other role-playing games would take down that concept too. Look at Dungeons and Dragons with its various
True.
basic expert and so on and so forth.
Very true.
But to also answer your question about the special place that certain weapon systems have, yes, not only will you be firing your phasers, you'll be firing your photon torpedoes, and those are called your direct fire weapons, which were not represented by anything except a die roll and what effect they would have. They were considered to be weapons that were fired at such high speed that it doesn't matter what your range was, it was crossing that distance within microseconds.
So we start off with the cadet scenario with a battle drill. So they give you a setup, an objective, the first turn, and it looks like each phase is divided into impulses. So you have a first impulse, second, third, fourth, fifth, seventh, and eighth. So each impulse must do something.
Yes, the whole game based around like we talked about earlier, the resource management. So you start the game, you start each turn by allocating your energy, where
Okay.
you're going to put your energy, and that will go ahead and determine how fast you're going to move. And how fast you move is going to go ahead and be put into another chart, which tells you when you move at each impulse. So, for example,
That's what it
um,
is.
yes.
What am I
So
on
if you
page
go to the back of the
9? Yeah,
yeah, if you go to the back of the book, there are charts,
here
and
it
the
is.
most basic game has an impulse chart that is very, very small. So if you go, there's an 8 impulse chart there. So if you take a look at that,
Oh, see, I'm on the 16 one.
yeah. So go to 8 impulse chart,
Blah, there's a
and
32 one. Must be up here.
yeah, oh yeah, my gosh. I mean, once you get up to the full game, you're playing on a
Here we
full
go.
full chart. This one is used primarily in the basic game because I believe only the most you can move a ship is about 8 spaces. So if you allocate all your energy to movement, all of the energy you can, you might be moving a maximum of 8 hexes per turn. And each impulse, the players would go ahead and call off, okay, this is impulse number, 1. Okay. Guess what? 8 moves 1, nobody else moves. Impulse number 2,
Oh, okay.
eight moves another space, and then 7, 6, 5, and 4 get to move a space. Impulse number 3, and so on and so forth until everybody moves. Now, what's interesting is at the end, at each impulse, you can fire your weapons at any point. So it takes on that idea, which we've talked about before in this forum, of simultaneous movement. So instead of saying I move and then you move and then we shoot at each other, which is slightly unrealistic, my firing can occur at any point. I can swoop towards you, fire all my weapons, and then turn around and get away from you as quickly as I possibly can based upon the movement chart and the impulse that I'm on.
Yeah, so you really have to think ahead. I mean, you may not
Yes.
want to put all 8 points into impulse. You may just want to put three because there's only, 5 hexes you want to move. It reminds me of a Star Wars Armada game where you actually have to plan 3 moves ahead, and
Mm-hmm.
and that they give you these round stacking cones that you put on top of each other, and then at the start of the turn you flip the top one, and that's what your capital ship does.
Right.
And then at the end you put it off to the side, or you then plan what you want to do 3 moves ahead and you put it on the bottom, and then next round you take the next one, and you have to do that. So you have to be thinking ahead because these capital ships just can't turn on a dime. So yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, so you really got to plan ahead and think about what your opponent's going to do and then what you're going to do. And this is just one ship. I mean, imagine if you had like 4 ships that you were commanding.
Yeah, and that's what is interesting, what that you just pointed out is this is something you have to really think ahead about and plan. And I don't want to use the chess analogy because many
Well, it is
people
a
go
chess game.
ahead and get well, many people get very, maybe perhaps a little persnickety of it and say, no, 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 chess is much more, strategic. I'm like, okay, whatever, sure. As a former chess coach, I get it. So no one has to go ahead and write us nasty notes about that. But suffice to say, there is a huge element of, like you said, planning ahead. Especially after those turns you take damage, because then you got to start asking yourself, do I dedicate energy to damage control? Where do I put my emergency points into shielding? Or are my shields weak on one side? Or how do I turn my ship? Where do I turn my ship to avoid taking damage? It gets quite interesting. Now, it's not for everybody because you are planning out move after move and taking it one step at a time. So it is like chess in that way, where you have to go ahead and just be patient with how the game plays out. But if you're looking for something fast and quick, you might want to stick to something like, X-Wing, as we've discussed in one of our first episodes,
I
second
love
episode.
X-wing.
Yeah, X-Wing is great. Yeah.
So where were we? Page 7 ish. Here we are. All right, firing arcs, combining firing arcs. So you have to be aware as to the direction of your ship and which weapons you want to fire, because not all weapons can fire at everybody.
Yes. So there's another element of that strategic thinking that you need to do, that chess-like thinking.
So they talk about phasers and disruptors. Scenario. Oh, here's a battle drill where you actually play it out. Here's the different impulses. So each turn has, I guess, depending on the size, the number of impulses. I guess in this one, there's just 8. There's 8
Yes.
phases or 8 turns or 8,
In the
well,
basic game. Yep.
in the basic game, impulses as to when you're able to move and do stuff.
Hmm. And if you
So,
take a look, and if you want to go ahead and scroll down back to the back of the book there, it would make much more sense to the viewer and to the listener, the the cadet ships. So continue to scroll down
oh,
just a little bit
ships, yeah,
more. Yeah. So when you're looking at
my
at
favorite.
these, yeah, D7. So those are the cadet ships. So this is a simplified diagram. So for those of you who are not familiar with Starfleet battles, if you think this is complicated, wait till you actually see the real life ships. But
Yeah, the
these are
Klingon
the cadet ships
dreadnoughts.
that you
Yeah,
use. Yeah. And as you can see, you have boxes that represent your ship systems, including your power systems, shielding systems, and other systems like weapons. And so in this game, in the basic game, in the most basic scenario, I should say, you have very little power to deal with. So you're not going to be traveling more than 8 hexes every turn. So that's why we have an impulse charge. And that's why everything is kind of scaled to that, more simple level.
now if I remember correctly, at the beginning of the turn, you had to count up how much power you had. Was that done? I think it was like warps and then battery. Your warp engines
Yes, you
to
have you
generate
have
power,
all
and
sorts
then
of powers. As a matter of fact, since we're at the
yeah,
SSD, we can talk about that right now. If you take a look, The primary power source for any starship is going to go ahead and come from its warp engines, which are the nacelles on either side of the vessel. So that goes and gives you most of your power. So this being the basic game, you can see that, for example, Federation Cadet Cruiser, we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 16 possible points of warp power that we can draw upon. But there are other sources of power that we can draw upon too. The auxiliary power reactors, APRs, those are basically antimatter reactors. Some people call them fusion reactors, whatever, but they are providing significant amounts of power, but they're not designed for movement.
And then
Then
the
we have the
batteries.
impulse. Mhm. Then we have the impulse engines, which can provide 2 points of power, which can be used for movement as well. And then in an emergency, I can drain the batteries. If I go ahead and that's BTTY, if I
Mm-hmm.
go ahead and use those points, they are gone until I recharge the batteries. Those are your
Ah,
backup system. So those are basically all the different places you can get energy from to run your systems.
plug in the 9-volt batteries quick.
Yeah,
So then you take those 16 points, you apply them towards your shields, life support. So those 16
yep,
points can go pretty quick.
very quick. You're not going to be able to do everything, and that was kind of what Cole was suggesting when he did all the research in the movies. I should say not the movies, beg your pardon, in the television series. It always seemed like Kirk was always asking Scotty, "Hey, I need power for this. I need power for this. I'll do whatever I can. I'll do." So there always is an indication in the Starfleet universe and Star Trek universe that you're always wanting to do more, but you don't have enough power usually in these earlier starships to do everything. So it's always a balancing act, a resource management question.
I remember I was watching Star Trek: The Next Generation with my son, and we burned through all. I think we watched them all like twice.
Mhm.
And it's funny because as you watch, that Enterprise, that version of the Enterprise, it seemed like it was getting its butt kicked every time it turned around. It was like the worst ship ever. It was constantly being beaten, constantly being beat down. I mean, I know it was there for dramatics, but it's like, here's
Uh,
Enterprise. It's going to get its butt kicked.
that was always the issue when you're trying to base a game off a game that's supposed to simulate all different types of combat within this world, within this science fiction or fantasy setting. If you're trying to base a game on it, the film, the primary source material, is just not good enough to go ahead and suggest what we can actually do with these things. You're right,
Sure.
absolutely correct.
So, those are the ships. Let's go back up. Where were we? Page 9 ish. We're just going to kind of fly through this.
But yeah, so when you get to the cadet game, like we were just looking at, that's going to go ahead and just get you through a scenario in which you have a cadet battle cruiser versus a cadet Federation cruiser, and you're just going to play around with the game rules about how to move, how to fire, some basic ideas about weapon systems, and that's about it.
So, there's the battle drill. Scenario number 2. They looks like they introduced shields.
Well, they introduced some additional rules for shields,
Okay.
including where the shields are hit and how you
Leaking
damage.
shields.
So this is where this is where the added levels of complexity come into the game, where you're now actually going to fight a real life battle in Starfleet battles, albeit
Okay.
very simplified.
Mm-hmm. Then they have the damage allocation, the photon torpedoes, the firing of the torpedoes. So when you fire a torpedo, it actually is a small token on the
It
board.
depends on, no, not photon torpedoes. Those are going to be direct fire weapons, which you will never see on the board. But
Oh,
if you fire
interesting.
plasma torpedoes or drones, which I guess somehow there was a reference, I believe, on an old blueprint about drones. And when Stephen Cole designed Klingon Worship, he said, "Oh, those must be weapon systems." So he included those, but those are weapon systems that fire that move at a slower pace than your typical photon torpedo or your phaser. Which, interestingly enough, if you look at some of the, especially the later films, photon torpedoes are actually slower than Stephen Cole imagined. So maybe they should be placed on the board
Yeah.
and fired as a weapon that has a representation on the playing surface.
Okay, so we got under attack, and then we move into scenario 3. Looks like they add in a maximum speed. Movement procedure. We kind of talked on that. Depending on how many points you put into impulse, depends
Yeah.
upon which phase in which your ship moves, much like X-Wing. X-Wing probably borrowed from that.
Oh yeah, many games went ahead and took these ideas, watered them down, or perhaps that's not the right word to use, right phrase to use, perhaps simplified them and made them a little bit more playable. But yeah,
And we have disruptor bolts. Are those any different than just the phasers? I mean, they gave them their own little category.
they have different game effects, but they fire in the same way, the same game rules, similar game rules.
And then here's the drones you were talking about.
Yeah.
Freighters, drone range, the convoy raid, the true heroes of the Star Trek universe, the Klingons.
And by the way, notice the Klingon face and
Yeah.
Klingon makeup. This is classic Klingon. This whole Starfleet universe takes place in one that has not been modified by either the Next Generation or the films or any of J.J. Abrams' alternate timelines. This is the original series as it was envisioned. However, some interesting add-ons with races, and then some races that only had passing mention that become major antagonists, like the Kzinti, for example,
Hmm.
which were mentioned in the animated series.
They were. Rules for scenario number 4, energy allocation. So here they talk about the warp engines. Okay, so
Right.
this is where you're drawing your power from. This is what you were
Right.
talking about before, the warp, the impulse, the reactor. And
And
that gives
notice
you,
again how they're introducing these rules one step at a time, trying to go
mm-hmm.
from like, here's how you move and fire to here's how you have shields. And now we're talking about the actual turn allocation by impulse. Yeah, absolutely.
Then you have to put points into life support, fire control, phasers, torpedoes, shields, all that fun stuff.
Which I never really completely understood. I mean, I understand the narrative of the game that you have to have life support, but wouldn't that be just assumed? And I don't remember this rule. Somebody who's listening to this who knows Starfleet battles forwards and backwards, I believe there's a rule that you can have life support off for a certain number of turns or whatever before your crew just dies.
Dies.
So if you're desperate for a point of power and you want to go ahead and start cutting off life support, go for it.
What's this? The robot opponent. This must be a scenario.
Yes, you can play it solo.
No. The Dakota intent. We have cadet scenario number 4. We see and then they build upon that. Scenario 5. Here we
Mm-hmm.
move into the damage allocation table.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this A, B, C, D, and E
Well,
on this chart.
those are the levels that you can reach. So, for example, if I roll, and this is the part about Starfleet battles that I've never really cared for because here's how damage allocation works. If I score 6 points of damage, I roll 6 times on this chart,
Okay.
and the first die roll, let's say, is engine. Okay, so I score 1 point of damage on one of the warp engines.
All right.
And if I roll another 3, I score that again, 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 until that is no longer available. Then if I roll 3 again, if there's no engines available, then I do hull. And if
Oh,
there's no
okay.
hull
So
available, then I do other. And so it's a progressive system.
gotcha.
In my opinion, if I remember correctly, what I did to kind of modify this was I said if you're shooting at somebody from their aft arc, you got to move up on the table, which made attacking from the back a little bit more dangerous to be frank, because the excess damage there, which you see there in column E, if you lose all your excess damage, your ship goes bye bye. It just explodes.
All right. Then we have examples of shield operation and damage allocation. That's what
Mm-hmm.
you were talking about.
Yeah.
Then we have an encounter. So scenario number 6, they bring in plasma torpedoes.
From the Romulans, yes, those are your typical seeking weapons, is what they term drones and and plasma torpedoes, which you designate the target, and that torpedo or drone will move at a certain speed and follow your target until either the target destroys the seeking weapon or the seeking weapon runs out of energy and dissipates or just simply floats out in outer space forever.
It just keeps on going.
Yeah.
I think it's torpedoes, the cloaking devices. I always found those
Oh,
annoying.
yeah. If you have a Romulan, you better have a cloaking device.
So what were the rules with the cloaking device? Because I thought I'd read somewhere it takes like 3 turns to cloak and like 4 to uncloak, or
Yeah, I think it's three impulses, if I remember correctly. So you
oh,
fade in and out.
impulses. Oh, okay.
Yeah, you fade in and out, and once you fade out, you remove the counter from the board, and then you have to go ahead and keep track of where you are by hexagon number. And that could be that's just an added complexity of the game that makes it much more difficult, but it also simulates what this is all about, and there were other rules that you could go ahead and do, and I don't believe they're in the cadet version about trying to go ahead and guesstimate and coming within a certain area. And of course, you can always fire your photon torpedoes on proximity views, which means if I'm even close to designating the right target, I can damage you anyway.
Hmm. And then the introduction to the other races, the Kazintis,
Yeah.
the Gorns, your favorite.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I love the Barnes.
The Orion Pirates.
Hmm.
I saw this picture and I swear, dude, I said, Data. How did they get Data? And this looked just like Data from the
Yeah,
next generation.
it does, doesn't it?
I was like, congratulations, Lieutenant. So now you've reached a stage in the rules in which you've now graduated to being a lieutenant. So slowly getting to be a captain. So they have energy allocation, damage allocation, a lot of allocations, multi-ship volleys, specific damage cases, more damage allocation.
And remember, this is the basic version of the game. The advanced versions of the game rule books were hundreds of pages long, with specific examples for just about every possible contingency within the Star Trek universe.
Klingon D6 battlecruiser, Lieutenant Commander. There's your corns.
Yeah, baby.
It's a very cool picture. Fractional accounting. Oh, now we're talking.
Oh, yeah. If you didn't think that was complicated enough, let's
It
go
gets
ahead and
worse.
start using half points of power. Half, oh my goodness sakes.
Yeah, at this point, I'm breaking out my comic book collection. I'm starting to sort them, you know, take inventory of my dust bunnies in the corner.
I mean,
Tractor
if
beams.
you could, if you can go ahead and find somebody who knows the rules and is willing to go ahead and be an actual, mentor with you, this game can be a lot of fun. However, if you get somebody who knows all the rules and is just going to use those to exploit you and try to find the one weakness that allows that person to destroy your ship, in the first, 2 turns, this game can be a pain in the butt. It
Yeah.
just it just is it's a game that rules lawyers can exploit to no end. But if you play it in the spirit of the game, it does probably the best job ever of simulating actual Star Trek universe type combat, and especially in the old series. Other
Hmm.
games came after it, including Starship Combat Simulator by FASA, which was not very good in my opinion, and we can go on and on about why later on some other time. And then there were some others. In fact, there was a game that came out by Game Science that preceded this one, if I remember correctly with my timeline. But it was very mechanical in its approach. So yeah, this game actually would try to do the best. Probably the only thing that came close was the re-release by Matthew Sprang of the Starfleet Battles game in hardcover of all things, which simplified the rules dramatically and got you more or less trying to think about how to play a captain in this Star Trek universe rather than an accountant.
Shield boarding parties. How did that work? That sounds cool.
Oh yeah, those are always the fun ones when you go ahead and start when you knock down somebody's shields and you say boarding parties away and you just start beaming boarding parties on the other person's ship, and You start going ahead and going from system to system and capturing it. It was
Blowing
all.
stuff up.
I've never seen it played out to its bitter end, but I just the possibilities were kind of interesting. And of course, some people like myself would modify these rules to suggest maybe we could have uh, boarding parties, quote unquote, on planetary surfaces and engaging in combat over objectives, like maybe a research station down on the planetary surface, or maybe a planetary asteroid, or says a planetoid had some sort of base that we had to capture. So the game had potential for all these really crazy scenarios, um, including fighting the space monsters that were so classic within the Star Trek universe,
Hmm.
which no other game ever really took into account. Every other game that simulated Star Trek combat focused on just starships. Starfleet Battle said, hey, you want to fight a space amoeba? It's there. You want to fight the Doomsday Machine? It's there. So there are options that you could do that. And that's what made this game fun.
I love the picture of the Orion Raider class like cruiser.
Yeah, that was one of the complaints people had, was that the artistry was not necessarily
I liked it.
as flamboyant as perhaps other games, but they were emulating a style. This is the late '60s here and early '70s. There was not the same level of graphic design that we would find in later decades.
You got the shuttlecrafts and administrative shuttles. Rescue at Regal.
Yeah, go land your shuttle and take your boarding parties and rescue somebody.
Here's how to turn, how to sidestep. So they have different ways of moving, it looks like, if your ship can
Hmm.
do it. Tactical maneuvers. Damage control. So could you repair stuff?
Yes, by allocating energy, you can go ahead and repair systems on your starship.
Hmm. Security and Klingon mutiny.
This was a strange idea. And again, it came from one of the blueprints. The suggestion was made that the Klingons made use of slave races or servitor races, and these people made up the bulk of their crews. And if you lost a security station, your crew could mutiny and try to take over the ship. It never, I can't ever remember that ever being implemented or even talked about in later iterations of the show or anything. So it was unique to the Starfleet Battles universe, the slave races that the Klingons utilized.
See, direct combat, laboratory systems.
Yeah, so now you can do research. So if you want to go ahead and try to kill that planet killer, now you have to accumulate
There it is.
some science points. Yep, there it is. So now you have to accumulate some science points in order to go ahead and figure out how to destroy the Doomsday Machine.
Doom. Doom. Graduate training. Yeah, so it looks like they're kind of getting away from the actual ship to ship combat
Oh yeah,
and giving you
and
other possibilities that the game can do.
yes, and that's what made it so interesting, because you had these different scenarios that you could do, these different ideas. Besides just shooting at each other, maybe you guys are going to cooperate. Maybe as a Klingon ship and a Federation ship start to square off, here comes the planet killer, and now you have to go ahead and figure out how to kill it together, or something of that nature.
Die with honor. All right. Graduate training, cloaking devices. Here's an ISSC cadet cruiser. So it looks like the sheets that you get pretty much comes with everything you need for the most part.
Yes,
I mean,
if you
here's
want to
your.
play this game, you
Mhm.
got everything in this book, which I don't think is produced anymore, which is a shame.
But I mean, even on the sheets that you get for the ship, it comes with the
Oh, I
charts
see.
that you need, for
Yes.
the combat, for the plasma. It's all right there.
That
I
was a
can't.
refinement made in later editions of the game, like this one, where
Mm.
yes, with the exception of your movement charts, all your combat charts, all the movement ratios and all that were all located on your ship status display, or SSD. So that way you could go ahead and not have to turn the rulebook pages every time you try to do something.
Oh, it drives me nuts when I open up a rule book that says go see this other rule. Then I go look at the other
Yeah,
rule. It says, well, it's in this other book.
right.
By that time, I'm taking all three of them and throwing them out the window. So the gist of it is, you have different phases. You add up your power. You allocate your energy.
Hmm.
You put your points into movement or you you allocate your power. Then you go into the different phases or the impulse movements. So if you're playing a smaller game, it'd be an eight, an eight phase or an eight impulse turn, where you start at impulse eight, I guess, and you work your way down.
Impulse one.
What?
You start with impulse one, which is in the upper left-hand corner there, and you go down impulse
Oh,
two, three, four, and so on and so forth.
I was reading it the wrong way. That's funny.
That's right.
You're right. Okay, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight. Okay, and speed eight, seven, six, five, four. Okay, I got you. Duh.
And by the way, clever people, if you did not mind the slight change to the game mechanics that would result, if you wanted to use the 8 impulse chart and you were traveling at speed 16, or whatever, just double the numbers there and make your life easier so you don't have to go down to those crazy charts, which are you're going to scroll down to in just a little bit. Yeah, there's the
Yeah.
damage allocation chart.
Yeah, there's the damage allocation. So you start at A and you work your way down. So if there's no more bridge, then it goes to the flag bridge, then it goes to the sensors, and then
All right,
by the time you get to M, your ship's blown up.
probably.
Probably. Advanced impulse procedure chart. So is this like a turn order? You move ships, move seeking weapons, or is this
Yep.
just a.
That is each step that you perform every impulse of the game. And if you play the standard game, there are 32 impulses in every turn.
Wow. Then here's the 16 movement chart,
Yep.
or 16 impulse.
Hmm.
Then here's the 32.
There's a 32.
That's an engineer's heaven right there.
Yeah, that's a professional engineer for you. And
So if
I'm
you,
not saying that's bad. I'm just saying
no,
that was definitely a chart designed by somebody with a love of math.
yeah, no, I mean, this was a fun game. I do recall playing it, and I mean, we all had a good time playing it. And here's
Oh yeah.
the Federation Heavy Cruiser, the Constellation classes. Was this the Enterprise class?
Yes, that's basically your enterprise right there.
All right. And here we have your D7, D6 Klingon battle cruiser, my favorite.
Hmm. Smartly designed vessel. I've
And
always
your
liked the War Eagle, the so-called bird of prey,
yeah. Here's your Gorn heavy cruiser.
which was never actually seen on camera during the original series or animated series, so they had to conjecture what it looked like. Same thing with the Orion pirate cruiser.
Yeah, I
Both
don't
those,
think I've ever seen a Gorn ship in any of the Star Treks, and I've watched them all.
if you watch the digitally remastered versions, they do now have an official looking Gorn ship,
Hmm.
and you'd have to go ahead and actually do a Google search, and you can find what the official Gorn ship looks like according to canon now. It's kind of impressive looking, to be honest with you. It's got 4 little nacelles surrounding a central like superstructure. It's kind of interesting. I like it.
Then our Orion pirates, more Romulans, more Gorns.
And interesting,
Gazinti.
here's another thing you could
Gazinti.
do. Yeah, if you scroll back down to the cadet cruisers,
Uh-huh.
if you wanted to, the cadet cruisers could end up being the basic versions, or not basic, but the smaller versions of these larger starships. So, for
Oh,
example,
yeah.
the Romulan, the battle cruiser, the cadet battle cruiser, beg your pardon. You can call that a D5, which is considered to be a frigate in the Starfleet Battles universe. So if you're clever enough, you can still use your different starships, and within this one game booklet, you have multiple different types of scenarios you could be running with multiple different types of ships.
Oh, very much so. So, yeah, they come with all these different fun ships. There's a Romulan cruiser. Looks much like a Klingon ship.
Yeah, remember that episode where they discovered the Romulans had made a treaty with the Klingons and got Klingon technology? The Hydrans are a methane-breathing race that don't even look human.
That's awesome.
And I have no idea where they got them from. That was the ISC and the Hydrans. I can't find them sourced anywhere in the Star Trek official canon. So I believe that's just Starfleet Battles. And by the way, Starfleet Battles does hold, as far as I know, someone's going to have to confirm this for me, a perpetual Star Trek license to continue this line of the Star Trek universe. So
Wow.
they've never had, as far as I know, somebody's going to have to confirm this for me. They never had to really renew it, quote unquote, and they can never lose it. So as long as they don't create anything that's outrageously non, Star Trek, they will continue to do this, and they have a loyal following. In fact, some people, including myself, consider this more canon than anything else that's come out since then.
So it comes with all the pieces.
Yeah.
There's your drones.
Just print them out and cut them out. This is available, if I remember correctly, on not drive through RPG, but drive through war games. So if you're interested in going ahead and getting a quick copy where it says print and play, and you're interested in Star Trek universe, here's my little plug for RPG. The free RPG, or not the free RPG site, but the RPG site you can get any PDF for almost any game.
Yeah, so if you want to be a captain and fly your own ship, this is the game. I mean, this is tactical, strategic. It's really a beautifully done game. It is really a lot of fun. I call it rules crunchy. It really is, but it's a blast. So I think that's going to wrap up this. Rob, did you have anything else?
No, I think we covered as much as we possibly can and given all sorts of opportunities for people to say, nope, you are wrong, and I hope they do.
Yeah, and if you do, please send it to us at rulesexplained@gmail.com. I'm John Merritt.
I'm Rob Nothing.
Guys, have a great evening.
Adios.